The government seems to have set up a brush fire on its own, and it's very difficult to imagine how they're going to be able to get out of this one.
Is this the beginning of the end for Mark Carney? Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we've got the Air Canada strike blowing up in Mark Carney's face. They have forced workers back to work and, well, they are not going back to work. This authoritarian stance that Mark Carney and the Liberals are taking isn't working. What's going to happen? Let's jump into this. Starting this one off, we've got Pleb posting this. Mark Carney's polling numbers are about to crash. The honeymoon is officially over. Well, this is in response to David Coletto of Abacus Data saying Mark Carney government may have single-handedly started a period of intense labor strife with today's decision. This in regards to Air Canada and forcing them back to work. He says, my research clearly shows that workers are incredibly insecure. The cost of living, housing costs, precarious work, macroeconomic instability, and AI have created a toxic cocktail, and unions want to demonstrate their value in protecting their members. He was elected to protect people, secure them, and provide more certainty. Today could send the opposite signal. And before we get to Air Canada, we're seeing these signals everywhere. Pierre Poilievre posting this one. New June motor vehicle data shows Carney's gas vehicle ban is even more outlandish than we thought. EV sales are down by 1/3, making up only 8%, 7.9% of all vehicles in Canada from January to June 2025 were electric zero-emission vehicles. As Pierre points out here, that number would nearly need to triple by January to make up this 20% that the Liberal government wants to mandate Canadians, force Canadians to follow. Prime Minister Carney needs to get out of his ivory tower before he wipes out both our auto sector and all of rural Canada. People aren't buying them, so they must force you. That's how authoritarians rule. Now, why are they? If you saw my previous video, well, all the components go through China. China has a stranglehold on this whole industry. Are the Liberals invested in this? That's the real question here. Do they have money invested in China that they haven't told the government about, or they have friends and family invested in? Why are they forcing this on us? It makes no sense. And everything is driven by money. Greedy people do greedy things. EVs are not suitable in Canada. They only work in lower mainland BC. Yeah, I mean, the temperatures just don't work well for them. And even in lower mainland BC, they don't work that well there either. You lose a lot of charge in the winter and in the summer. They work best in temperate weather. So if you have a Tesla with a big battery, it's probably not a big deal, especially if it's your daily driver, you'll save some money on it. But if you're out in rural Saskatchewan, you don't want to be driving an EV because there's no charging stations and the range isn't going to be good in the winter. And moving ahead with stories like this isn't going to help Carney's approval rating either. So Mario posting this, if you're a refugee and you're gay, Canada will give you 12 months of income. If you're Canadian, you get nothing. Correction, you get the bill. Canadian Assisted Refugee Program, the UNHCR, Rainbow Road, and other referral organizations can identify and refer LGBTQ+ refugees to be resettled under the Government Assisted Refugees Program. Refugees resettled under this program get 12 months of income and resettlement support. What does it matter what someone's orientation is? Why is this a criteria? This is ridiculous. Who cares if a refugee is gay? This is beyond stupid. We should all just collectively refuse to pay taxes. The government can't come after everyone. I mean, I've heard these kind of comments about a year ago when things were getting really bad with Justin Trudeau. You saw a lot of these comments, and now you're seeing to see that kind of spark up again. I identify as a gay refugee male. Give me money now. Moving ahead, we've got this one. U.S. suspends visas for Gazans after far-right influencer posts. All visitor visas for individuals from Gaza are being stopped while we conduct a full and thorough review of process and procedures used to issue the small number of temporary medical humanitarian visas in recent days. This goes on to say a bunch of Gazans are getting into America through Qatar. They're being transported via Qatar Airways. And this is just another situation where Donald Trump and his administration are putting their line in the sand and Mark Carney's on the other side of the line. This doesn't bode well for Canada. And speaking of Trump, they're going to be having this meeting soon with Putin and Zelensky and trying to sort this out. And Ezra Levant posting this, along with Zelensky, Macron, and others, Alexander Stubb is invited to Washington. Who? Stubb is the president of Finland, population 5 million. Finland gave about 3 billion to Ukraine. Canada gave 14 billion and wasn't invited. Mark Carney wasn't invited to represent Canada during these talks. As he said, under Carney, no one cares what Canada thinks. Our country's become a joke. Moving ahead to Air Canada. So Air Canada Union says flight attendants will continue to strike, defying the government's orders. Or as Mark Nixon says, take their mandate and shove it. They're not going back to work. They're underpaid, overworked, and done being treated like garbage. And that is the message coming out of these protests. And really, Pleb points it out best here. Refugees who come to Canada get paid better than Air Canada flight attendants. Let that sink in. Here we have it straight from the union's mouth.
All 10,517 flight attendants, each and every supporter, each and every union president that's here working for Air Canada, we will remain strong We will not back down. Now is not the time, and we will move forward the way we choose to move forward.
Well, and that is referring to that back to work order. They had been told that they were needed back on the job at 2 o'clock this afternoon. That's Eastern time. They're saying they are not going to do that. They are going to defy this order. This crowd has been joined by other unions, not just Cpac, Unifor. We've got the Machinist Union here. We've seen Postal Workers Unions here. The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario is here. So this crowd is growing and has blocked off this entire lane here at the departures area at Pearson Airport as they continue to chant and ask the government ask Air Canada rather for what they say is a fair contract. Now, 10,517 flight attendants in total across the country will not be going back on the job, according to the union.
So according to the numbers there, over 99.7%, something like that, nearly 100% of flight attendants were in favor of this strike. That tells you something. They're just not getting paid enough. And people can say, well, go get another job. When it comes down to it, these people are working hours that they don't get paid for. At the very least, they should be getting paid those hours when they're boarding and deboarding. When flights are not in the air and they're working, they need to get paid for that. At that point, they can decide, okay, do I want to go into another career if this doesn't make enough money? But at the very least, they should be getting paid for that. And they really should be getting paid more because, as I mentioned in a previous video, Air Canada flight attendant, 38 years on the job, only making $50K is despicable. It begins, Canada is going to start standing up for itself. I mean, that's what it is. And in this case, it's Air Canada, but people are tired of the whole situation, and they're going to take out some of that government frustration out on Air Canada here as well. As this guy says, they lost the unions now. So the Liberals are losing everyone, including the unions. People are starting to regret voting for Mark Carney. So Mark Carney's numbers, as David Coletto pointed out here, are these going to start slipping? Have they gone too far already? Mark Carney's been full of lies. We see his investments, which are absolutely absurd. He's 95% invested in America. Clearly doesn't care about Canada. His actions back it up. He seems to be benefiting China, America, and himself. So you can see him ripping up the order to get back to work. So there are potential implications for that. We'll get to that in a second here. Legally ordering them back to work. And you can hear people here chanting, "Shame on you, Patty Hadju," the Labour Minister.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
Execs get bonuses, we get excuses. So a lot of support for the people here. Jumping over to CTV here, we got Tom Mulcair here saying that Carney has created an unbelievable mess. This could be the start of the end for Mark Carney.
All right, let's start with Air Canada. The union has refused to return to work as per the government's order. What do you make of this decision?
I think it's one of the very first big missteps by the Carney government. They blew this one. You have labor relations. That means that there are two sides, as in any relationship. But Minister Hajdu and the Carney government have weighed in so heavily on the side of Air Canada in this one that it's galling. The union raises the issue of the appearance of conflict of interest with the person who's now in charge of the Canada Industrial Relations Board, Maryse Tremblay, that you just referenced in that lead-up. Well, how is it even possible that we're debating that? She spent her career inside Air Canada representing them as a lawyer or as outside counsel. And now she's in charge of the Labour Relations Board. By the way, I'm not taking anything away from her in terms of her skills as a lawyer. But when you've got such an obvious appearance of conflict of interest, you deal with it immediately. Here, you're trying to use that institution to force back to the table, go to binding arbitration, and they seem to have forgotten in the Liberal Party, they once knew, that labour rights are guaranteed under the Canadian Constitution. Mr. Carney spent the campaign, whenever he was asked about Bill 21, would you challenge Quebec's laws that are discriminatory to the Supreme Court? He had a very good answer, which is the Liberals are the party of the Charter of Rights. Well, guess what? The Charter of Rights protects labor relations. It protects the right to become a member of a union. It protects the right to negotiate and bargain collectively. And you can't take that away lightly, as the Carney government has just done. Now, it's the dead of summer. I'm not sure that Minister Haidu has a lot of experience in these things, but they've created an unbelievable mess. And by the way, sometimes easy to finger wag and point at the unions. I know Mark Hancock, one of the union leaders from Cpac who was there. This guy is experienced. He's not a hothead. He had that gesture of tearing up the order, but I think he was trying to get a message across, because Mark Hancock is not somebody who does that lightly. And I think
it's a very symbolic gesture there. Patty Hajdu, she's not fit for this job.
that the Canadian Union of Public Employees has a history, a trade, a fine track record of being able to work and overcome great difficulties. Here, the government seems to have set up a brush fire on its own, and it's very difficult to imagine how they're going to be able to get out of this one. If the union is saying, there's no way you're forcing us back, there's no way you're doing this, are they going to start coming up with outrageous threats of penalties? All this is going to be played out before the courts. By the way, Renee, this should have been thought out in advance. And there are some very smart people around Carney, but I guess a lot of them are on holidays right now, because this is one of the worst messes that I've seen them in since they got elected at the end of April.
So I don't usually agree with Tom Mulcair, but yeah, what's Carney going to do? Are they going to have outrageous threats and force these people back to work, jail time? It'll further look worse on Carney. He can't get out of this one now. As we jump over to this one here, we talk about the implications of them not following this order to get back to work. Sure, they could probably charge them or put them in jail or sue them or something, but this all just looks awful on Carney.
With me now is Sandeep Gokhale, employment and labor lawyer. How strong is the union's claim that this order violates flight attendants' charter rights?
Well, if that's their legal position, there's a process for them to make that challenge. But I think the larger concern is what happens in the interim. Typically speaking, in these legal challenges, whenever there's an appeal of some sort, you have to abide by what the order or the original decision is in place right now. And what we're hearing from Cpac is they're not going to do that as of 2 p.m. today.
Now, if Cpac refuses to comply and remains on strike, what consequences could they potentially face?
Significant ones. The way I see this playing out would be that Air Canada would bring in a legal strike application as of 2 p.m. today to say Cpac's in an illegal strike based on Mr. Haidu's order. And Air Canada will be able to quantify the damages, the financial damages that they are suffering as a result of the failure to return to work. And so Cpac's decision is one where they're demonstrating support for their membership and showing the fight. But on the other hand, they will be starting to incur financial liability as a result of this decision.
Any of that financial liability, though, makes Mark Carney look like a goon. And considering Brookfield, it's in their best interest to have these people back at work. So Brookfield owns 13.2%, I believe, of Chorus Aviation, which owns Air Canada Jazz. Now, it operates separate from Air Canada, but it's under the same umbrella, and they're connected. Now, Air Canada Jazz isn't on strike, but Air Canada Jazz does link in directly with Air Canada's flights. So Air Canada Jazz will have less flights, connecting flights, because Air Canada is not operating. With Air Canada not offering all their normal flight routes because they're on strike, then Air Canada Jazz suffers. Thus, their numbers will suffer, and thus that affects Brookfield's stock. So Mark Carney wants this Air Canada strike gone because it hurts his own investments in Brookfield. Not only that, these people are all friends. These flight attendants, some of them on strike, telling the Air Canada Jazz ones, hey, you guys should come join us. You guys should go on strike too. This just starts spreading like wildfire. They tried to end this right away. It's not going to end right away. This is blowing up in Mark Carney's face. And the guy's financially invested in this situation to end quickly, which is just such a ridiculous statement. He should be forced to sell all of his stocks. Will the union now incur financial penalties, lawsuits? Maybe, but it just makes the Liberals look like a bunch of goons. Financial
liability, and as well, back in 1978, when the president of CUPW ignored back to work legislation, he was actually sentenced to jail. Could that happen still nowadays? I mean, that was back decades ago.
I mean, I would be surprised if we went that far right now. I think the main issue right now is how can we get people back to work right now based on an interim timeline before ultimately other issues can be dealt with through collective bargaining and or binding arbitration. And right now, I think the focus would be on the financial impact CUPE is going to be, taking on as a result of this kind of outright refusal to follow the order.
What do you imagine it will take to bring these two parties to a deal that, they're both satisfied with?
Well, I think there's a challenge right now. There's a clear disconnect in terms of some central issues, which is, what parts of the work day do flight attendants ultimately get paid for? And it doesn't sound like they're close to a resolution on that. It would be ideal if they could roll up their sleeves and come up with a creative resolution to address that issue. So at least for part of that time, flight attendants are in fact compensated. But it sounds like they're so far apart from that right now, which has ultimately led to Minister Hajdou's decision to order the parties to binding arbitration.
It sure doesn't help that you could see here labor disruption, posting this kind of stuff and blaming the employees. I mean, Air Canada went on to their own X account and were blaming employees for labor disruption. It's preposterous. They don't even pay their flight attendants to help people onto their planes. And then they blame them for going on strike.
Answer the bias, but if these employees refuse the back to work order, does that mean that the binding arbitration is off the table as well?
No, that process will continue to operate. CUPE will have to participate in that process. It'll be a different discussion if CUPE outright refuses to participate in the binding arbitration process. But I suspect that they will come to the table because that's a separate legal process. And they'll have representation through binding arbitration.
Well, this is a mess for the Liberals. Don't start work until you get paid for work. Different rules for everyone. Canada Post goes on strike for 32 days, then ordered back. Air Canada goes on strike for 32 minutes and ordered back. Makes nonsense. I mean, it comes down to finances. Brookfield wasn't invested in Canada Post, so they didn't care. There's a financial interest there for Mark Carney and the Liberals to get Air Canada back to work right away. Carney protecting his shares. Shame on Air Canada and shame on the Liberal government.